Good morning, everyone. All right. Good to see everyone. Time, almost everyone have joined. That's a good thing. Okay. So yesterday we have started trigger. I have tried to give you a little background of the things like what exactly is a trigger and what could be the purpose of writing a trigger. So we have tried to understand like a few of the basic things, kind of introduction related to this topic. Now, I also have told you, like, there are a few of the things there are you which you could understand straightly when we would be writing a trigger, when we would be actually trying to code this. All right. So let's do in that way, that is, I mean, I guess this is a better thing to understand triggers rather than understanding it from the theory. So we have one use case where we wanted that inside an account object, there are few fields like industry and facts or website. So we wanted these fields to become the mandatory field. So let me take you first of all to the account object. So if you go to the account and if you can see that there are few of the fields inside an account, like, if I try to edit them, I'll just show you that. So there are a few of the fields like industry. So you can give a value, you can not give a value. And then second one is facts. So I'm just removing this facts and website. So presently, see, if without supplying the value of industry and phone and facts or sorry, facts and website, you can even save a record. So this clearly indicates to us that, these fields, not at all, they are mandatory, at least right now. And we wanted to make them big. We wanted to become mandatory, particularly from the trigger. So we also have learned this, right? We also have learned this that there are a few different ways by which you could make a field as a required field. So you can make a field required. For example, if you have all these three fields, you wanted to make them required. Let me take a quick revision on that as well. So what you can do is, like, the first way could be you can go and edit the field from here, and you can click onto that required checkbox. Yes, this is going to be the first way. Second could be your page layout customization. You can definitely go to the page layout customization, and there you can make these field as a required. I can make a double click and I can make this as a required. Now, there are certain significant differences between if you make a field required from the required checkbox, otherwise you make it required from the page layout customization. And I have told you almost every difference between these two processes. There's one another way you can make it required from the validation rule as well. And there is one another way you can make it required from the from your Apex trigger. So and there could be two another ways would be, oh, 1 second. So you can make it required if you're using a Visual Force page as a front end. From there, also you can make it required, or maybe if you are using a Lightning component, maybe LWC or something like. So you can from there. So merely there are so many different ways by which we can make it required. We can make a field as mandatory, but yes, there are significant differences in all of them. Mostly when we do this, we either follow required checkbox or page layout customization or with the validation. For few of the circumstances only we go with the triggers. I have already told you, like, if there is something you can achieve this, if a business logic, what you can achieve with some other rules, try with that. Triggers should always be your last option. Trigger should always be a last option. Why? Because trigger is that powerful code which once is executed, it cannot be stopped. And moreover, if you have any business automation which could be implemented by certain non-programming tools, maybe like a validation rule, or maybe like a roll-up summary, or maybe like flows, or maybe like a process builder or a workflows. All the workflows and process builder are decommissioned from the Salesforce. So we'll consider only flows in that case. So our first choice would be like, our first choice should be always try to implement things without applying the coding part. But if it is not happening with all of them, then we should go with the triggers, right? Then we should go with the triggers. Anyways, that's a separate part of discussion. That's a separate part of debate. Right now, let's understand due to certain circumstances, we have only trigger as an option to make these fields as a required field. So I have few fields inside an account object like industry and then website. There's one more, I guess, yeah, facts. So these are some of the fields which we wanted to become mandatory, but from the triggers. All right, let's understand. Okay, so I shall start writing a trigger, but before that, let me make you understand what is a trigger dot new and trigger dot new map, trigger dot old and trigger dot old map. So this is the right time to discuss. Yesterday, I have told you that I'm going to skip it right now, but tomorrow I would explain you the whole thing. So I would first of all would explain you that thing, those things rather, and then we'll proceed with writing a trigger. All right. All right. So let's look onto this diagram. And let's try to understand what is trigger.new and new map from here. Trigger.new and trigger.new map. All right. And from this diagram, again, we are going to understand, like, we are going to understand how trigger actually works inside in Apex programming. All right. See. Let me just think of this. I mean, how could I? I'm just trying to pick up certain example for this. All right. See, the basic role of a trigger is to provide a validation. Is to check for certain prerequisites. That means, say if for example, you go to a shopping mall. All right, you go to a shopping mall. And when you try to enter there, they usually frisk you over there. There is a security check in the gate itself, and it would see for this, like, whether or not if you, you should not carry anything which is unauthorized, maybe a weapon or something, all right, which is not allowed inside in this building. So they would try to frisk you onto this, right? They would search for that, and they would going to decide, are you a validated person to enter into this building or not? So in the same way, trigger, whenever you are trying to perform any DML operation, for example, if you're trying to insert something inside database, inside in any table, because objects are tables inside database.com. This we have discussed a lot of time, that objects, basically every object is a table inside database.com. So if you're trying to insert something, you're trying to update something, you're trying to delete something, you're trying to undelete something, these all are the DML operations, right, on which you can apply the triggers. So whenever you are trying to perform any DML, if you're trying to insert, let's take this an example. I have a data. I wanted that data. I wanted a record of account to be get inserted into this table. All right. I wanted that I have this, for example, I have this record. Ram Kumar is a name. Hot as a rating. Banking as an industry. And maybe this is a phone or a fax number. So this is a record that we wanted this record to be get inserted inside in the account object. So when this record is getting inserted, so before this record is going to be inserted, it is first going to be checked by a security person, by a security guard. Who's that security guard? This security guard is the trigger. So trigger is going to first of all see whether this record is enough eligible so that it could enter inside in this building, in this shopping mall, in this object. So this process, by the way, is called, in terms of programming, this process is called as validation. Trigger is validating whether this record is enough eligible that it could enter inside in this building, enter inside in this database table. So how trigger would perform this everything? Let's try to understand this one. Let's try to understand this whole process. And from this diagram itself, you would going to understand what is trigger.new and then what is trigger.new map. All right. The first thing, if you wanted to see the trigger, if you wanted to visualize the trigger in real world, you can assume that Trigger is something like a security personnel. Like if you go to any public area, like if you go to railway station, you go to airport, you go to a shopping mall, a few other highly secured areas where you feel yourself as safe. Why? Because there's a person, there's a security person who's checking everybody who's coming inside into this area. He's checking and he's making this sure that nobody would carry something which would harm the other people as well, right? So this way, like you feel yourself safe inside in this premises. So trigger could be assumed, trigger, you could see the trigger as a security person, which would make it sure that uh, whatever the data is entering inside in the database table for a particular object, or maybe it is inserting or it is getting updated, it is deleted. All DMLs, all right. All DMLs like insert, update, delete, and undelete. So it is valid. It is going to validate that, and it is going to make it sure that this is a right data, this is a proper entity, and it does not have any deficiency into it. All right. Let's consider we are going to write a trigger to make the facts field as mandatory, right? Facts, industry, something like that. And for example, let's for an instance understand the record. When this record is getting inserted, the value of industry, and say this is a facts. These are not supplied. These are not supplied. When this record has been created, the value of the facts and the industry has not been supplied. So trigger will not allow. Trigger would say, no, I cannot allow this record to be get inserted inside a count object. Why? Because my rule, the rule against which I'm checking this record, that rule state that the value of industry and the value of facts should be there. But because with this record, I can see there is no value. The industry is blank, and also the facts is also blank. No value for these two fields have been supplied. So I cannot allow this record. I cannot allow this record to enter inside in the count object. So this is what? This is a validation. This is what? This is a validation. And the main role of a trigger is to provide the validation. Main role of a trigger is to provide the validation. All right. The main role of a trigger is to provide the validation. Now, let's discuss. So how trigger manages this whole thing. All right. You might have seen when you go to places where like security mall or shopping mall or something. So they usually have a cabin, but mostly that is being used only with the women's. But yeah, let's consider that box where there's a women's security guard, and all of the frisking what they wanted to do, they usually do it inside in that box only. That security box, whatever the name, I don't know what's the name for that. Now, in the same way, you could make an assumption like, what happens is like, whenever you try to insert something, you try to update something, delete something, undelete something. That's a record, first of all. This is a record. This is what? This is a record. So what trigger do is like, trigger first of all would take this record and store it inside a place. This record, not just one record. There can be 200 records which can be accommodated inside in this place. This box is capable to store 200 records. That's another interview question. I hope you guys are catching this all, and you're probably writing this. This is not a movie, all right? So whenever you are sitting in my class, that's a drawback of a virtual class. I cannot see you, and I cannot see how you guys are actually attending this lecture. But the only thing what I can do is like, I can make an assumption. I can hope that when you are sitting into the class, you side by side, you always try to make your own notes, whatever you feel is important. You make a note of all those things, and later on you share that. All right. So this place where the records are getting stored, so that trigger can perform a checking onto that. This place, first of all, is capable to store 200 records at a time. This place is capable. I'm talking about this box. This place is capable. What is the name of that? I'm coming into this. Gradually, we are growing into this same direction. So this place is capable to store 200 records. So whatever the validation the trigger is applying, whatever the activity the trigger is trying to check It can check onto 200 records at a time. This is what is the capacity of triggers checking mechanism. So if there are 2000 records, so it would be something like 2000 divided by 200 means 10, I guess, 10. So there would be a batch of 10 records which is going to be formed, and trigger would check 200 individually. It has to repeat this process for 10 times, but that is not you have to worry about. Don't worry. That's all happens internally. This is just, this is just for your knowledge. That everything happens internally, so we merely don't have to worry about anything. At the end, we'll see. At the end, we just talk about result that trigger has evaluated all 2000 records, and it has checked, it has validated, and it has seen whether these records are proper records or not, and they are allowed to insert or not. Insert, update, delete, whatever it is. But you should know about the internal capacity. This place is capable where the trigger would take this record to perform this whole frisking, perform this whole checking, to perform this whole validation. This place is capable to store 200 records at a time. Now, what is the name of this place? This is called as trigger.new, or it can be stored inside trigger.new map. I'm not going to say these are same. No, they are different. But these are the two places. Actually, what happens is, like, whenever a record comes, one or two or whatever, up to 200, that simultaneously goes to two places. It goes to trigger.new. It also goes to trigger.new. 1 second, please. Yes. So I was talking about, like, whenever a record comes for this validation activity, simultaneously it goes to two places, trigger.new and trigger.new map. Right, trigger.new and trigger.new map. And if you would observe, gradually I'm increasing the component into this discussion. I'm gradually increasing the things inside in this discussion. So this place is first of all capable to store 200 records, whether it is trigger.new or it is trigger.new map. It is capable to store 200 records. If you are trying to perform an insert operation, now let me make this precisely about the DML, what you're trying to perform. If you are trying to perform an insert, or else if you're trying to perform an update operation, so in these two cases only, delete, undelete, I'm not talking about that. But if you're trying to perform an insert operation, or else if you're trying to perform an update operation, in these two cases only, what happens with other two, we are going to have a discussion. There would be a separate discussion on that, right? Right now, let's focus ourselves on to think which we are studying right now only. So if you are trying to perform an insert operation, a new record is there which you are trying to insert inside in an object on which you have wrote a trigger, or there's an existing record which you wanted to perform an update. We're going to talk about update in detail, but with the next diagram, with the next coming use case, maybe maybe the next example. But you have to understand, like, if you are performing an insert operation or an update operation, in both of the cases, whatever the record here, the new record what you are trying to insert, or whatever the existing old record on which you are trying to perform an update operation, both of them goes to two places simultaneously. And these places are capable to store 200 records, at least 200 records. The name of them is trigger.new and trigger.new. It's a kind of memory. Now let me tell you, like, what is the form of this memory internally? What is the structure? We have learned about collections, isn't it? And we know that there are three different forms of collection: list collection, the set collection, and a map collection, right? Trigger.new internally is a list collection. I hope you guys are writing this whole thing. Trigger.new internally is a list collection. Trigger.new map internally is a map collection. Trigger.new is a list collection, whereas trigger.new map is a map collection. And you know what? How the data are being stored inside a list collection and a map collection. Map is a key value pair type of entity, right? Where if there is a record, records can be duplicated, but the ID is the key. Key is always unique, right? So we're going to see some examples where we have used the map collection, trigger.new map, old map. And I'm going to justify why we have used that. All right, let's now first concentrate onto this. Like trigger.new is a list collection. Trigger.new is a list collection. Whereas trigger.new map is a map collection. Similarly, trigger.old, into coming slides we're going to see. Trigger.old is also a list collection. Old map is a map collection. Now, every new record which you are trying to insert, every new record, when you are trying to perform something called as an insert operation, then you have a new record. That goes to trigger.new as well as for trigger.new map. Usually people taught this. Only the new record goes to trigger.new map, but it is not like that. Even if you're trying to update something, although that's an old record, it's a previous record, it's a record which is already inside in the object, but we are trying to perform certain updation into that. Even that also goes to trigger.new and right. Even that goes to trigger.new and new map. For new map, we're going to see in another examples. Right now, let's concentrate on to trigger.new only. So what would happen? Let's consider this is one of the record. This is a record which we are trying to insert. For the update part, we are going to talk on later example. अभी हम सिर्फ insert पे, because right now we are having one use case. अब हम एक use case पे काम कर रहे हैं, जिसमें we'll have to make it sure that if a record is getting inserted inside into the account object, if a record is getting inserted into is trying to get inserted into account object, we'll have to make this. We'll have to make it sure, like, it must have industry value, or it must have the fax value, it must have the website value. So this is a kind of check, this is a kind of validation that whenever a record is trying to get inserted into account, it must have the values for these three fields, isn't it? So let's concentrate on to this one only. So this is a record. There might be some, I'm just trying to explain this one record, but this applies to like, to every one of them. If you're, for example, if you're trying to insert 2,000 record, 20,000 record, 50,000 record, 1 million record. So this rule applies to every one of them. This rule applies to every one of them. All right. So there is a record which is trying to get inserted into the account. And let's say, so first thing would be what happened. This record would get transferred into a memory called trigger.new. which is internally is a list collection. So this is a memory. This is a memory, by the way. This is a place, because if a record is getting stored, if you are storing something, that you can only store something inside memories, right? All right. So, one second. So this is a form of memory, like exactly trigger.new is what? It's an internal storage memory. You cannot access this, but trigger can access. So this record, first of all, would get stored inside into trigger.new. Now on trigger.new, trigger would apply that business logic. The logic what you have created, the logic which is going to check whether this record have a value of industry, whether this record is having a value of like facts or website or whatever, right? So whatever the rule, this is the rule what you have created, right? This is the rule. That rule is going to be applicable onto trigger.me inside. Whatever the records are there inside trigger.me, the rule is going to be get applied onto this apply. I mean, this application of rule happens inside in this place. And then if this record, let's say if this record is a validated record, it has everything. It has a value of our industry. It has a value of facts and website. Then and then only, this record would is by, I mean, is passed by the trigger, and it would be entered inside. One new row, one new record is going to be get created inside in this table, inside in this object. So this is like trigger dot. This is like a trigger box, and this is like what is the role of trigger dot. So every record which is trying to insert, first it automatically goes to trigger dot. And the business logic what we apply, it get applies directly onto trigger. You cannot apply record it over here. You cannot apply the business logic onto this record. Right? There's no place. But this record, because that is being transferred, that is being stored inside a memory called trigger.new. So the business logic, what the rule the which we have created, we have to apply them, on trigger.new. Because trigger.new is that memory, is a list collection, which actually have all those records. Right? This is the thing. Give me a second. Yes. All right. So let's move with the programming part. So we have this use case. Whenever a record is getting inserted inside an account object, we have to write down a trigger so that it would make sure that this record or every record which is getting inserted must have a value of industry, facts, and website. So what we are doing, we are trying to make these fields as a mandatory field, right? So let me show you like how we can write down a trigger for this. All right. So I would take you to developer console first of all, and then let me close out everything. Yeah. New, but I'm not going to select class for this because we are not writing a class. We are writing something called as a trigger, right? Trigger. So you first of all would require to give the name of that trigger. So trigger names usually we give on the name of the object, but you can make other names as well. But that name should describe the operation. So it's up to you like how you give the name. Because I'm creating this on account, I shall give a name called account trigger. Account trigger, right? And then you have to select that object on which you are creating this. This is the list of all objects, right? This is the list of all. You'll have to select on which object you are exactly creating this trigger. So I've selected account from here and then submit. So this is the initial format. This is the initial format. A trigger whose name is account trigger. On is a keyword. Trigger is also a keyword. It's created on the account, and this is created on before itself. Before itself. See, people usually have this confusion. I'm not sure why they are confused about this. So I am including one more. Apart from before insert, I am including one more thing over here. I'm including it for two events. Before insert and before update. So either if you are inserting a new record, that time also this trigger should check. If, for example, if I mean, this is what, see, I try to understand. If I am creating a new record, inside account object, this trigger will make sure that at the time of creation of new record, you must have supplied the value of industry as well as facts as well as website. So when you are trying to insert a new record, see, this is a question you'll have to ask this to yourself. People usually, I mean, they come to me and they came to me and they ask, sir, we are finding this difficult to decide the events of trigger. And all right, so when you ask me this question that you are confused about what should be the event, then I always say that you didn't perform the detailed analysis. You have not asked the questions to yourself. Because if you would ask the question to yourself, then you would probably easily understand what is going to be the event of this trigger. Now see, before insert, or should I add before update as well? I'm confused into that. So I'll ask this question to me. I'll come to this. What is my use case? What is my use case? My use case is like to make few of the fields of account as a required field. All right. So if it is a required field, if you are not getting this example, tell me. Okay, I'll teach you in another way. I'll teach you in another. See, you know one thing, for example, if I'll try to create a new record, you see the name is a required field over here. So even though if you're trying to create a new record, that means you're trying to perform an insert operation. That time name is mandatory. Okay. If you go and edit a record, for example, if there is a record, yeah. So if you are trying to insert a new record, let's say name is mandatory. What if I'm trying to update a record? Can I remove name and can I try to save it? I'm trying to update. See, so this would answer your question. This would answer your question. That means if you are building up a trigger to make a field required, that becomes required even if you are inserting a new record or maybe if you are updating a new record. Right? So even though if you are inserting or if you are trying to update an existing record, that field should appear to be a mandatory field. This is first thing. Now, second confusion. Second confusion is about before and after. Second confusion is about before and after. So whether this should be a before or after, now again, this is something you'll have to decide. Tell me, let's say this use case, you are trying to insert a record or update a record. Before means before saving a record. Before saving a record, you must enter a value. So precisely in this case, the logic which I am building, should be get applied before saving a record. अगर ये record save हो गया, let's say this record has been saved. ये record save हो गया. अब save होने के बाद आपने इंडस्ट्री का वैल्यू नहीं दिया, आपने फैक्ट्स का वैल्यू नहीं दिया और वो सेव हो गया, और आप कह रहे हो कि यार वो इंडस्ट्री इज अ मैंडेटरी फील्ड, फैक्ट्स इज अ मैंडेटरी फील्ड, वेबसाइट अगर इट्स अ मैंडेटरी फील्ड तो वो तो उसके बिना सेव हो गया ना. आप सेव होने के बाद अप्लाई करके फायदा क्या लॉजिक भाई. अगर आप एंड सी दिस वैरीज, दिस इज गोइंग टू वैरी फॉर एवरी केस. यू वुड हैव टू आइडेंटिफाई कि मैंने बिफोर लगानी है या मैंने यहाँ पे आफ्टर लगानी है. So for this identification, you'll have to understand the whole logic. You'll have to ask the question to yourself. आप सिंपल मुझे बताओ, once the record is getting saved, एक बार वो saved हो गया, उसके बाद में आप मैंडेटरी कर सकते हो क्या किसी फील्ड को? क्वेश्चन तो ये आता है कि अगर वो मैंडेटरी थी, if this field was a mandatory field, if this was a mandatory field, if this was a mandatory field, how come this is possible that it does not have the record, and without giving the record, without giving the value to this field, you are able to save this? कैसे हो गया? तो ये नहीं होना चाहिए. दिस मीन्स दिस वैलिडेशन शुड बी गेट अप्लाइड बिफोर द रिकॉर्ड इज गेटिंग सेव्ड. आफ्टर पे हम आएंगे, जब आफ्टर पे आएंगे तब उस पर बात करेंगे. अभी तो मुद्दा ये है कि इसको मैं क्या करूं, बिफोर या आफ्टर. तो दिस हैज टू बी अप्लाइड बिफोर सेविंग द रिकॉर्ड, नॉट आफ्टर सेविंग द रिकॉर्ड. राइट. तो ये चीजें थोड़ी सी जो है इसको क्लियर करते चलो यार, इसको क्लियर करते चलो. राइट. चलो. All right, so I wanted to make a few fields as a mandatory field over there, right? एक काम करते हैं हम इसको, let's stop it over here right now, because with this trigger I would have to explain you the bulkification process as well, and I don't want it that to be get splitted into 2 different days. वो flow टूट जाता है. ठीक है. So I'm just saving this for now. इतना save करके रख देते हैं, and we'll continue. We'll continue from writing this trigger, because there is a lot of the things that needs to be get discussed while writing this code. So let's stop it over here. आज यहीं पर रुकते हैं, and अभी समय हो चुका है तो हम इसको कल कंटिन्यू करेंगे. Yeah, any questions around this? Any questions around this or around anything if you have anything. Any questions so far? All right, thank you so much for joining.